Hello, this is our second video in a series of tutorials for the SavvyUI C++ GUI library. In the previous video, we did the Getting Started video where we explained how to set up the library, how to create a project, and how to set up a frame, which is the main window for the application. And we added a couple of components just to show how it basically works. In this tutorial, we're going to tackle the layout managers. SavvyUI library has two layout managers. One of them is the grid panel, which lays out components in a grid-like layout where you have columns and rows, and you basically create the layout of the columns and the rows, specifying the width and height, the width of each column and height of each row, and then you place components at specific indexes of rows and columns. The other layout manager is the fluid panel. The fluid panel is just a responsive panel so that you could simply add components. You just add the components without setting any layout up front, and then the components will be laid out from left to right. And there is a minimum set on the components so that if the screen size becomes smaller, as it gets smaller, components will wrap to the next line and so on. And that one does not require much setup in the beginning. You just basically add the components and they will be laid out in that responsive fluid manner. It's great for small screens, and you don't have to worry about components running off the screen or any of that stuff. So the first step, we're gonna tackle the grid panel. We're gonna explain it in details, and we're gonna create a screen that has a set of fields at the top of the screen, and then it will have a grid at the bottom, and then below the grid we'll have some action buttons that allow to in this tutorial we're not going to implement functionality, we're just going to implement the layout. So we'll just be placing components in the grid panels just to show how they get laid out. So to start, this is a continuation of the previous tutorial, so we're going to continue from there. And we're going to create a class. We're going to call it grid panel demo. So we're going to start by adding a new item, which will be a CPP file, and we'll just call it the grid panel demo. And we'll also add a header file for that. We'll name it the same way, but it will have the H extension for header. And we'll start by declaring the class, which will be class grid panel demo. And we'll declare the constructor and destructor. And then we'll add a function. We'll basically inherit from grid panel. And we'll include that. Now that we have this, if you go to the declaration of grid panel, you'll see that it has a lot of functions, and you could implement any of these functions, but the main functions are clear, set margin, set border, set layout, add component. On window resize gets called automatically, but we don't have to implement any of that stuff. The only thing that we need to worry about is setting the layout and adding the components. And to do that, we'll just do it inside the constructor. So we're gonna declare maybe 5 fields to display at the top of the screen at the panel, and then we'll display the grid as I mentioned, and then we'll have some buttons at the bottom. We'll add, edit, and delete button, and then we'll have an OK and cancel. To do that, we have to declare these fields. So we have first declare labels, and that would be, let's say we have a first name label, last name label, address label, telephone label, and then we'll declare text fields for these fields. So that would be, we're going to copy all this. We'll just rename them from label to field. We're actually going to declare the telephone as a masked field instead of field. That way we can set the format on that. There's a mask that we can set. We're going to use the US phone number format. So in order to use these, we just have to include the right header files. So we just put a label in there, text field, masked field, and as we mentioned, we're going to have a grid, so we're going to include a grid, and we're going to include buttons, 5 buttons, and for that one we're going to have add button, edit button, delete button, OK button, and cancel button. We'll add 2 more includes, one for the grid and one for the button. And now we'll copy these constructor and destructor to the implementation file. And we're going to include that header file in here. So it will be grid panel demo.h. And we'll paste these. We'll implement the constructor. And now in the constructor, since this is inheriting from grid panel, we can automatically call all the functions from the grid panel. So we'll start by dividing the screen into rows and columns. So we're going to display first name and last name on the first row. Then we're going to display an address on the second row. And then we're going to display the telephone number on the third row. And then on the fourth row, we're going to display the grid. And then the fifth row, we're going to display the buttons. So that's how I'm going to divide the screen. So because we're displaying the first name and last name on the first row, we have 4 columns. Basically, we have the label for the first name, the field for the first name, the label for the last name, and the field for the last name. So we can have 4 columns, but I'm going to have 5 to leave some space between the first and last name. In order to do that, we'll just give them equal space. So I'm going to divide the screen into 5 columns, and each column will be a fill column, meaning they will occupy the exact same amount of pixels horizontally. So each column will occupy 1/5 of the screen. So to do that, we'll start by setting the layout. And we'll do -1, -1, -1, -1, -1. That allows the layout manager will divide the screen into 5 different columns, each all the same size. Now we're going to have 1 row for the first and last name. So let's make that 30 pixels. 1 row for the address, 30 pixels. 1 row for the telephone number, 30 pixels. I'm going to add 10 pixels for space between the fields and the grid. So that will be a vertical space between those two. And then we're going to have the grid that will occupy it will be a fill row. So it will occupy the remaining space. So we're going to set it to -1. And then I'm going to have another 10 pixels between the grid and the buttons. And then we're going to have 35 pixels for the buttons. So now that we already divided the screen and we put our layout. So now we'll start adding the components. How do we add the components? We call add component. And we pass the address of each variable. So we have the first name label. That will be our first, and that will be laid out at in a column 0 and row 0. The next component will go right next to it, and this will be the field. So these are going being displayed horizontally. So this one will be at column 1, same row, row 0. And now we'll have the last name label. And this will go at, remember we wanted to leave a space between the first and last name, so we're going to skip index 2. So we're going to go to 3, which is column 3, column 4 I mean, and then 4 for the field, and we're just going to change the name of that to last. So this is our first row. Now we're going to go to the next row, and we're going to display the address. So we'll have address label and address field. We're going to display the label will basically occupy just one column, so we're going to keep that at index 0, but we need to make it row 1 because now we're displaying on the second row, and the address field will start at 1 and row 1, but it will occupy 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. So this will span over 4 columns. Now we'll add the telephone number, and that will be telephone label. And this will be the same thing. The label will go will occupy the first column, but it will be row 2. And this the telephone field will be at start at column 1, and it will be row 2. But the phone number doesn't require that much space, so we can leave it at 1, or I'll just have it span over 2 columns. Now we're going to add the grid. So the grid will start at column 0, but it will be at row 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So row 4, and it's going to occupy 5 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns, and then 1 row, so we don't need to specify that since it's 1. And then the next thing, we're going to go to add the buttons. So we're going to go down here and add these, and now this will be the add button. And we're going to add it at 0, but row 5, 4, 5, 4, 5, 6. So it will be row 6. Each button will occupy one column, and this one will be the edit, and that will be at 1, 6. Then we have the delete button, and this will be at 2, 6. Then we'll have the OK button, and that will be at column 3, 6, row 6. And then we'll have the cancel button, and this will be at row 6. So that's it. That's the layout. So let's test this. What we're going to do, we're actually going to display this component as part of the main screen, but we have a button menu that we just basically built in the getting started tutorial, so we're going to continue from there. So we're just going to add another item to that menu, and we're going to call it the grid panel. And then we're going to add to the card panel another panel, and we're going to call this the same thing, grid panel, and we're going to call the component, the grid panel demo. We haven't declared that yet, but we're going to go ahead and do that. So we're going to go to the top of this class, and we're going to do button. I'm sorry, it's a grid panel demo. And the grid panel demo, we're just going to import that, include that header file for that. Now that we added that, we're going to come here to the selection change. We're going to add another else. And here we're going to receive when the button, the grid panel item in the button menu is clicked, we're going to receive selection value equal to that text that we set up for that item in the button menu. And here we're going to basically just make that card visible, and that will show us that panel that we just discussed. And so I'm going to run at this point the application to show how it works. So in the previous demo, we showed how to build the button grid and tree view, and now the grid panel that we just built, this is what it looks like. So you have labels, you have the fields occupying whatever, and then you have the buttons at the bottom. We might have missed the index, messed up the index for the buttons. There should be 5 buttons there, but we'll go ahead and correct that. And we also haven't initialized the labels or the grid. That's why you're not seeing the label text and any of that stuff. So let's change the theme first to make it light color. Let's leave it at that. And then we'll go back and make the corrections that we need. So in the grid demo, if I go ahead and take a look at where we laid out the component, the buttons, we have 0, 1, 2, 3. Oh, we didn't actually, we added the OK button twice. That's why the manager, the layout manager, if you add the same component multiple times, it will only occupy one position in that layout manager. That's why we didn't see it. So now that we did this, let's actually initialize the components. So we start with the first name label, and we're going to set the text to be first name. And then we're going to initialize the last name label, and this will be last name. We'll initialize the telephone label or address label. That will be address. And then the phone label. And now we're going to initialize the buttons to have text, to show text. So there will be set text, and this will be add, and we'll copy that 5 times. Edit, delete, OK, and cancel. We're setting the text here. So now we initialized all the labels and all the buttons, and now if we run this again and we click on the grid panel, now we see the labels. We could adjust the labels to make them right aligned, and to do that we're going to go down here, and you could take this label and call set alignment, and the alignment is along. If you specify -1, it's going to align left, which is the default. If you specify 0, it's going to be centered. If you specify 1, it's going to be right aligned. So in our case, we want it to be right aligned, so we're going to specify 1. And we're going to do this, the same thing for the last name. And the address. And then the telephone. And now if we run the application again, we'll see that they're right aligned. Now we need to initialize we're going to initialize the grid just to add some columns. We're not going to implement any logic, as I mentioned in the beginning, but just to make it look good. So we're going to go and add columns to the grid. And yeah, to do that, you basically call add column on the grid. And these are the different properties that you can pass. Some of them are defaulted. So we're going to start with the first name. This is the name of the column, so you can make it all lowercase, no spaces needed. And then the title of the column, so we're going to make it readable. And then the next value is visible, so we're gonna set it to true. And the width ratio, if we're gonna make it occupy, um, let's say, we're gonna divide the grid into 10, uh, uh, 10 spaces, and then the first name is gonna occupy 2 of those. It's up to you how you divide the grid, but you'll see the result of this once we run the application. So the last name will also be visible, and it's also going to occupy 2 spaces. And then the next one, we're going to display the address, and we'll make the address occupy 3 spaces. And then we'll have the phone number occupying 1 space. So now that we added the columns, if we run again and click on that, now you see the columns. So as you notice, we assigned 2 spaces for the first name and last name, so they're equal in width. And then we assigned 3 spaces for the address, so it's almost time and a half of these 2 columns. And then we assigned 1 space for the phone number, and that's what happens. So now you have this layout. If you expand the screen, it automatically readjusts. So as you resize the window, they automatically get resized. This is a very powerful layout manager, and it works really nicely with responsiveness, and it allows you to place components exactly where you want them to be without them being moved to places where you don't want, for example, with the float panel or the responsive panel, you can't control the layout. So basically, you just place the components from in a row in sequence, and you just add them. As you add them, they'll be placed from left to right, and then the layout manager will automatically wrap them into the next line and so on based on the screen size. But you don't have control over where exactly they get displayed. That's if you need to do that, then which basically for most cases you're going to be using the grid panel, which is the one we just used. So now we're going to implement, this is about it for the grid panel. We're going to implement another demo class for the fluid panel, just to show how it's used. So again, we're going to go and create our files for the fluid panel. We'll go to add new item, and we'll call it fluid panel demo, and we'll add the header file. This is a header. And we'll just go ahead and do similar thing to what we did with the grid panel. So we're going to call it fluid panel demo. And this one will inherit from fluid panel. And we'll include that. Bound include. So now we have it included. Again, we're going to create a constructor and destructor. And instead of redeclaring all the variables and stuff like that, I'm just going to go to the grid panel demo and copy these fields. And we'll also copy the includes. And now we'll go and implement these two functions, the constructor and destructor. First, we have to include the fluid panel demo. And I'm going to paste those. We'll implement the constructor first. And in the constructor, again, I'm going to go to the grid panel, grid panel demo, and just copy the initialization of these fields. So I don't have to type this again. So we're just going to place them there. Now that we initialize these, actually for a fluid panel, we don't have to even have labels because we just pass the fields and we can set, as we add the components, we actually specify also a label, and the label will be managed automatically inside the fluid panel. So I'm going to delete these labels. And now we're going to delete them from here. We don't actually need them. And we start adding the components. So this is a fluid panel, so it also has a component function, add component, and it has different parameters. You don't have to specify a column and a row, you just specify a label for each field. So we're going to add first the first name field, and you have to pass the address of that. And we'll just pass the label first name. And we'll copy that and paste it 3 times. And the second one is the last name. And then we'll pass the address field. And then we'll add the telephone field. Now the good thing about the fluid panel is it's fully responsive. However, it doesn't allow you much control, so you can't really set the width of each field. So now all of these will have the exact same width. This is not a good layout to use if you need, for example, the address field usually require much more space. The first and last name would require more space than telephone. Now you can't control that. So when you do this, it's just gonna assign them the same amount of space horizontally, and it will lay them out in a sequence. But this is just a demonstration of how the layout manager works. So we'll just go ahead and continue with this demo. The next step, we're going to go to our demo, the main file, and we're going to add another item to the button menu so we can access that demo. And we'll just call it the fluid panel. And the same thing, we're going to add it to the card panel so it shows up in the card on the right side when the menu item is clicked. And we need to go up to the top of the class and declare that. So we're going to say fluid panel demo. And we just need to include that. The only thing remaining is to handle the event. So when the selection made in the button menu and we get fluid panel as the item that was clicked or selected, we're just going to set visibility to that panel inside the card panel on the right side. If we run the application now, you'll see that we have another item in the menu called fluid panel. If I click on that, notice how the the fields are distributed from left to right. They're all the same width. And as you minimize the screen width, they'll start going on wrapping to the next line. So as you're doing this, this is the responsiveness. This is the power of this panel, is its ability to actually move fields to the next line and so on if they don't fit on the same line. So it has a lot of uses, but not if you want to control the width and height of rows and fields and all that stuff. In that case, you would need to use the grid panel. And that's it for this demo. Um, um, we'll have more tutorials. If you haven't seen the first video getting started, please do so. And there will be a lot of videos coming up for demonstrate the usage and how to program each component. And that's it for today. Thank you for watching the video.